Hi, this is Anirban Saha, and I welcome you on behalf of the team to the first episode of Season 2. During Season 2, we interview a selected few professionals in the domain of data science and converse about what it takes to get a job in the real world. Today in conversation, we have Dr. Omar Zaidan, and he insists that we call him just Omar. Omar is a senior applied scientist at Amazon in Berlin, where he leads a team of scientists working on natural language processing in search. Previously, he has worked at Microsoft on a variety of products such as search and machine translation. He has completed his master's and Ph.D. from Johns Hopkins University in the US. In this discussion, we explore a lot of things that range from leadership to team communication, tools, programming languages, and fundamentals that a young applicant might miss out on, and what qualities in an applicant he looks forward to, and also vague job descriptions and checking all the boxes, and perhaps a little more than that. For the next 8 weeks, every Wednesday evening, we would release one episode of this podcast season 2. If you like our work, hit the follow button on our LinkedIn page. The link of this page is given in the podcast description. Also, do share your feedback with us and listen to all other episodes. Let's get started. Hello, Omar. It's a pleasure to welcome you today at the podcasts.
Hello, Anirban, and it's also a pleasure for me to be here.
Towards the start of the conversation, let's focus on your journey. You started as an individual contributor within a team, and now you are the team leader. How did your perspectives about teamwork and contribution towards the team, contribution to the company, and thoughts about leadership change?
Yeah, good question. Also just to clarify, I started out, as most of us do, in an individual contributor role. I am now managing a team. It's not the same team I started out with, so I've changed roles a couple of times during the past few years. To address your question specifically, I think my concept about leadership is something that I can best summarize as the following. I now realize that every person on the team could be a leader and has to be a leader. Right? And I think at the beginning of my career, I did not really understand that. I kind of went into it thinking, okay, my manager or my team lead, they're kind of leading the whole thing from A to Z, and they need to tell me what to do. And that was, I would say, a pretty big mistake. Thankfully, one that I learned quite quickly from. So what I think is really important for everyone to realize is that you have to take ownership over what you're working on, and you have to express your own opinion on it and shape not only what you will accomplish, but also how you will accomplish it. So probably that's the main thing that changed about my view about leadership, is that everybody is a leader in their own kind of project that they're working on. You don't have to have the word lead in your title to exercise your leadership.
You lay a lot of emphasis on communication within the team. Where do you think, what important role does communication just within the team play, and where do you think young professionals go wrong when they enter a new team?
Yeah, I mean, let me see if I can maybe address the second part of your question. I think a lot of the things around communication apply equally, both to people starting out, but also people who have been in the industry for quite some time, which might surprise some. But I think every time somebody joins a new team, there's going to be kind of a phase where everybody just gets used to each other, right? So each of us has a different way of expressing thoughts and opinions and ideas, even if it's the same idea. And you just need to take some time to understand that different people just have different ways of expressing those things. Conversely, when you join a new team, I think you should also try to be aware of kind of some established practices that the team has in terms of how we communicate progress, how we communicate ideas, how we come up with new ideas. So I think there's a little bit to play here on both sides, both the person joining the team, but also the team that's welcoming a new member. I wouldn't say there's too much difference between young professionals starting out in their career and people who are maybe later in their career. I mean, each one kind of faces different challenges when it comes to communication. What I do see sometimes is that maybe younger folks are either overly too confident or maybe not confident enough in their own opinions. But I think that's okay, right? I mean, you'll take some time and you'll find the right way of expressing your opinions and backing it up with the right data. Let me see, the first part of your question was about, if you could maybe remind me a bit about it, it was more about communication within the team.
And
yeah,
how...
we're asking about mechanisms of how to ensure it works out, or what the importance. What was the question, if you can remind me?
First would be the importance, and the second could also be the mechanisms. Thank you for adding to the question.
Okay, yeah, good. So I think communication within the team, I mean, I think of it as having kind of two separate purposes. They're equally important, but they kind of look at very different things. So you can look at one aspect, which is kind of very practical, right? In the sense of communication within the team is important because you want to know the progress that's being made on the various projects that are going on. Especially when you have a larger team, there are a lot of things going on. It's going to become very hard for each person on the team to know what everybody else is working on. So you need to have good mechanisms and good methods of communicating kind of both progress, but also if you're having any obstacles and if you have any blockers, so that everybody on the team is more or less aware of what you're working on. So that's kind of the first kind of way I think about communication within the team, is just so that people know what's going on. The other aspect of it, which is maybe more practical in the long term, is just building trust between the team members, right? I mean, I've seen this many times, and maybe I've been guilty of it myself, is when somebody works on something and they're not really communicating with the rest of the team what they're doing. And then only at the very end of, let's say, a 2-month or a 3-month period, they say, hey, I've been working on this for the last couple of months, and check out the results, check out the outcome. Even if it's a great outcome, the rest of the team might be questioning, or wondering, how come you're working on this? We've never heard of this before. So it's not so much about the quality of the work or whether it's good or not. It's just about, can you make sure that you, as a team member, are communicating with the other people around you, just so that you can get their trust and so that they can communicate back to you, right? So I think communication within the team is important for those two reasons. Now, what kind of mechanisms and how you do that, I do think it varies a lot from team to team, but there's thankfully a lot of research already on this. There's a lot of tools that allow you to communicate things easily between each other. And I think it does vary from kind of also in terms of personalities that you have on the team. Varies on whether the team is remote or they meet each other in person every now and then. What is important is that you do have some mechanism of communication so that nobody feels that they have no tools and that they have no way of telling everyone else what they're doing.
So when you interview a young professional to get him or her into the team, do you look forward to their leadership qualities and communication skills? And what are the other qualities you look forward to in a person who you know that you're going to work with in your team?
Right. So now we kind of switched into interviewing, and I think a lot of the things I'll say now really have always been true, even when I was interviewing as a team member. I mean, now I'm kind of leading a team, but I think the things that are important now have always been important. So you kind of brought up the two main sets of skills that we think of. There's the set of technical skills, and there are the skills around, communication and just collaboration. I guess you could call them soft skills, I suppose. Of course, they're both important. And what I find very, quite nice is that I think most people understand that, right? Most candidates I talk to, whether it's now or in previous years, people do seem to understand that, and they do seem to want to highlight both kinds of skills they have. There are exceptions, and I do think that is probably indeed something that maybe younger professionals suffer from a bit more, in that they think technical skills matters the most, but they don't really spend too much time practicing things like presentation or just talking with others, communicating progress in precise terms. And that's a bit of a challenge, right? So they're both important things, and I think people realize that, and that's a good thing. It is a bit tricky to maybe give feedback sometimes after these interviews, because I don't know, it's not always easy to tell somebody, well, your communication is not very good, because you also don't want to be misunderstood. You don't want somebody to take it the wrong way. I think it's just a matter of practicing, first of all, right? So take any chance you have to present or to collaborate with others, particularly people you haven't worked with before. That's always, I think, very helpful. But also just be aware of the fact that this will be something your interviewer will try to assess and probe for. So don't ignore that completely. I do think at the end of the day, the technical skills, of course, are the core, right? That's the most important thing. And if you can't demonstrate that you can do the actual functionalities of the job, no amount of great communication would help in that case. So definitely don't neglect that as well. But just know that employers now, I think, are looking for quite well-rounded individuals to join their teams.
So what we understand from whatever you said right now is just technical skills is not enough. You also need to be at least moderately good at communications, be it communicating progress or just talking within your team and being a team member, doing teamwork, being a team player for that matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah.
So has it been that an applicant was very good in technical skills, but then someone had to reject him or her because their soft skills were not good enough?
I mean, it happens. I mean, you kind of want to be definitely, as an interviewer, you want to give the benefit of the doubt to whoever you're talking to. At least that's my approach to it. So, by no means do companies look for the perfect candidate. I also don't want to scare people away, right? It doesn't mean that you have to be perfect in all of these things and to check all of the boxes. What you do need to realize, though, is that the fact that, let's say, for example, that your communication skills are not, let's say, below average, that fact actually prevents you from, as a candidate, from expressing how good your technical skills might be, right? So even if the line of questioning or if the conversation at the time is about a purely technical thing, you might know your stuff really well. You might be talking about a tool or a set of algorithms or knowledge that you are very familiar with. But if you don't have the right way of communicating that knowledge, that's actually going to hurt you, right? So to the interviewer, you might seem like, well, I'm not sure if they really understand how this model works or how this algorithm is used, etc. So, you and I have been talking about these things as two separate sets of things. I mean, that's a nice way of kind of talking about them. At the end of the day, they're all connected, and being good at communication helps you illustrate to your interviewer how good you are at the technical stuff too. So I do think the two, to some extent, go hand in hand as well.
Talking about applicants and applications, a lot of people complain, and this is the favorite question of our team member Shubham, that the job descriptions are unclear and the job titles are not very clear. When you were going through that, were you also confused when you were applying to different jobs? Were you confused with different work titles?
Yeah, I'm just a normal person. I was confused too by a lot of things. By the way, I mean, as an applicant, you also have to understand that there's a limited amount of, let's say, degrees of freedom. For whoever is writing that job description, they kind of want to say so many things, but in a fairly short amount of text. So it's also not very easy to write these job descriptions. That being said, there are a lot of job descriptions that are, I think, all over the place, sometimes even contradictory. They even contradict themselves. There's a couple of challenges here. One is that within the industry, even the same title might mean very different things across different companies. I think data scientist, for example, that's, to me, first of all, it's a very common title, but it really means very different things in every single company. At Amazon, it means one thing. At Microsoft, means something else. In other companies, it means something else entirely as well. They all have to do something with machine learning. That's true, and maybe a bit of data science, or a lot of data science, perhaps. But the amount of emphasis each company puts on each one of those aspects differs a lot. So that's the first source of confusion, and that's just something you have to deal with, I think, as an applicant. The other part of where the confusion comes in, and that's a bit unfortunate, is the person who's writing the job description isn't always the person who actually knows what that job entails, right? There are a variety of reasons for this. It might just be a mismatch, let's call it that. But it might also be because you're talking about a role that doesn't exist yet, or it's for a team that is still being formed now, right? Or for a variety of reasons. So it is challenging. And yes, as an applicant, my advice is look at these job descriptions. If you see too many red flags, maybe it's best to take that with a grain of salt, right? Maybe even decide not to apply. I'm not sure, right? I mean, I don't know how much you want to extrapolate from reading a job description to judging the whole company. A lot of these things are driven by individual teams or individual organizations. But my advice is always know that there will always be some uncertainty in this job description you're reading. And the best thing you can do is that when you do interview, ask a lot of questions, ask a lot of clarifying questions. They're interviewing you, but you're also interviewing them. I know that's a cliche by now, but it's definitely true, right? So if something is unclear or you'd like to understand more about some aspects, if you do end up getting an interview with that company, ask them a lot of questions. People like getting questions too, right? The interviewer. It shows not only that you're proactive, that's already a good thing, but it also shows that you're interested and people like to talk about their teams and about their companies. So nobody's ever gonna complain that you're asking them questions.
So when you applied to different jobs, when you were relatively younger, did you apply to jobs only when you ticked all the boxes, or did you apply when you could tick say 60% of the requirements and then you just went ahead and applied?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. I mean, I can tell you what I did, which is maybe somewhere in the middle. I mean, I certainly did not stop myself from applying to a position just because I didn't check one of the boxes, right? Because I think a lot of these things are, there's some leeway and there's some flexibility around these things, right? And it's not always clear what somebody means when they say minimum requirements versus preferred requirements versus just requirements. I mean, it's again, part of the confusion that you were talking about is that these descriptions are not standardized, and I don't think they can be standardized either. I definitely never applied to a position that I felt is irrelevant or where I felt I would not be able to contribute. But I would strongly encourage everyone to apply to things that seem interesting to you, even if you don't fit, as you said, check all the boxes. There's a variety of reasons why that is, and what's the worst that could happen? Nobody gets back to you, right? I mean, you don't really lose anything. I'm not saying you should spam companies and apply to everything. I mean, that's not good either. But if you see something, you say, hey, this actually seems very interesting. I think I can contribute to this. I can make an impact. Go ahead and apply. I do think a lot of candidates kind of exclude themselves from applying to these jobs. It is definitely something I see more with, I think I see more with younger candidates. And I would encourage you not to do that. You should be your own best ally, right? You should be your own advocate. If a company looks at your profile and decides not to proceed with you, let that be their call. Don't let that be your own call, right? I hope that made sense, but yes, take these things with a little bit of a grain of salt.
Talking about unclear job descriptions and work titles, you have worked as a junior or entry-level applied scientist and then as a senior applied scientist. Except for you gaining more experience over the span of time, how different are these two roles?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're probably less different than you might think. Although I should say also senior versus junior, that also might vary from company to company. I'm talking about at least the companies I've been at, I think in the kind of software engineering industry and machine learning industry. So first of all, in some sense, to get to that point of becoming a senior, kind of the promotion philosophy at a lot of these companies is that you should already be operating at that level anyway, right? So even from that perspective, I could tell you, well, it wasn't so different, I suppose, right? The main difference, I think, is that once you become a senior or a principal or whatever other titles there might be, the kind of impact you make is driven not only by what you are doing and kind of what you're producing, but it also is driven by how you can help others produce things and help others be impactful. So I'd say the main difference between being, let's say, an entry level, even if it's it's not just for scientists or engineers or program managers, whatever career path you're interested in. When you're kind of an entry level kind of team member, a lot of your impact is driven by things that you're actually doing yourself. The more senior you become, a lot of your impact is driven by ways, by things that you do to help others be impactful, whether they're junior or not, right? It doesn't have to be only juniors. So I think that's the main difference. So I definitely spend more time. I started spending more time as a senior talking to others and guiding them and giving them kind of feedback about what they're doing and kind of trying to draw from my own experience to help them than when I was still kind of at the entry level. I hope also that made sense. But I think in terms of the end result as a team, that's what really matters, is what is the team doing and what is the team trying to achieve. It doesn't really matter if you're senior or not. Everybody should be trying to help a team accomplish these objectives.
Like you mentioned, that every person has to be a leader.
Totally, yes.
Talking about recruitment, when you are hiring for NLP positions, do you see a knowledge gap in younger applicants?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these points of discussion or questions are a bit tricky, right, to answer, if only because I'm just one person and you kind of only see the people you actually talk to, right? There's a lot of candidates that I don't talk to for whatever reason. So a lot of my answers also have a bit of a bias just because of who I happen to be talking to and who I happen to interview or assess or what have you. So again, what I say, may or may not be true. One thing I do notice is that there's a lot more emphasis, let's say with fresh graduates, there's a lot more emphasis on knowing tools than there is on knowing how these tools work, right? Or let's say the fundamentals of NLP or machine learning. I'll stick to NLP and machine learning because that's my domain. It might be true in other domains as well, I'm not sure. But so what I often see is, we have somebody, we're talking to them, and they know quite a lot about the various tools or libraries, programming languages too, which is very good, of course, that's important. But then if I go a bit into asking about the machine learning fundamentals, they don't really know much about that. Probably also something similar happens when you're talking even within that, kind of the theoretical part, the modeling part, when you talk about recent methods versus kind of what we now call classical machine learning. Again, there's a huge knowledge gap there from what I can see. Now, whether that's a bad thing or not, I don't know, right? There's also my own personal bias because that's the stuff kind of I knew and I was trained on. Is it no longer important? I don't think so. I think it's still important. So that's why, to me, it seems like a gap. But again, that's just one person's opinion. I think the more concerning part is people who know the tools and they say, I'm a machine learning expert, right? But then you try to probe them around, well, how does this actually work? And they're not really, how should I say, they don't really know, right? Or their knowledge is somewhat superficial. And that's okay for a lot of jobs, by the way. There's nothing wrong with that. So it's also all about knowing what kind of skills are required for a specific position. And if there's a big discrepancy there, to the interviewer, it's going to look like a gap, right? So that's at least my own personal view. And it probably applies to other roles as well.
So what would you suggest to the young professionals?
I mean, there's a lot of things that you can say around how to present yourself, how to do the resume, how to apply. I think you're talking more about the technical aspect of things and maybe knowledge. Yeah, I mean, again, I in my opinion, we live in a time where we're very fortunate to have a lot of resources online, a lot of tutorials, a lot of blog posts, a lot of people talking about their work, presenting their work in video format or otherwise, and that's fantastic. My main advice there is that in order for you to claim that you know X, whatever X might be, you should try to actually do it, right? Actually try to implement this thing. No amount of hearing about, BERT. So BERT is one of these state-of-the-art models that we use in machine learning in NLP. no amount of hearing about it is going to get you the same kind of knowledge as actually doing it yourself. So that's probably one main piece of advice I would give to people. Knowing something means that you've done it. It means that you've really understood the ins and outs of it. You understand how the field evolved into getting to this point. It doesn't just mean you've read a lot of blog posts and you've heard a lot of people talk about it. That's all great. And I'm not saying that's not useful. That's very useful. But that's not sufficient in my opinion.
We have put a lot of effort to make this episode happen. If you think we have done a good job, please share this episode with your friends, colleagues, or with anyone who may find this episode useful. Please drop us your feedback as they matter a lot. Other details about the podcast can be found in the description. Hi, I am Shubham, and I'm sorry for this interruption. Please continue listening to this episode right till the end. Thank you.
This sort of leads to a scenario where we see an industry-academia divide. Would you agree to this?
There could be a divide, yes. I mean, I think, I don't know if you're asking about knowledge or you're asking about expectations.
Knowledge and expectations both.
Okay. So I think in terms of knowledge, certainly the more recently you've been in a graduate program or the more recently you've been involved in a world-leading research group, the more familiar you will be with the most recent methods. And so you would come into the industry or into a company and you'd actually know more about something than your manager does, even if your manager is a scientist and has done a lot of research. So that's always possible. So I guess that's one kind of divide, right? The other kind of divide, which is around, as I call it, expectations. So, and again, I'm sticking with machine learning here just because that's kind of my domain. If you're a fresh graduate, you just did a lot of work on machine learning, or even in academia, you've been doing academia for a while, academic research. To you, the most important thing will be the model, right? You'll say, just give me a problem. I will
Make a
train.
model.
Yeah, I will make a model. I will try so many different things. Give me also a metric and I'll optimize for that metric. And, after a few weeks, I'll give you the best model I can get for this metric. In the industry, the challenge is that we don't always know what the problem is. So you need to define the problem itself. We don't always know what the right metric is. So you need to define the metric. And defining the metric itself is not easy, but also if your metric depends on some kind of labeling, that's also not easy. So you actually end up spending a lot of your time not in training machine learning models, although you should do that as well. Hopefully, you'll do a lot of that. But you'll be doing a lot of things that you didn't necessarily do before. And if you're doing pure academic research, and if you were one of the kind of more, let's say, junior members of that research group, you kind of already have a problem defined for you and a metric defined, and everything is well defined. All you need to do is implement a machine learning model. And so I think there's kind of a shock to people joining the industry because you have to do a lot more things, a lot more diverse things than just training a model. And even when it comes time to train that model, there's a lot more restrictions on what you can do, right? Because let's say you're working on a product that is actually deployed in production and serving real customers in real time, then now you have to start thinking about things like latency and runtime and maintainability and all of these things that you didn't necessarily think of when you were in academia. I hope people are thinking about these things. Maybe they are more so now than we used to. But in the industry, you can't escape that, right? So you can have the best machine learned model. If it's too expensive to run, then you're not going to deploy it. And in some sense, you didn't manage to have impact on your product, right? So I think that's kind of probably the biggest difference. Yeah, it's just something that people have to also realize when they join the industry, that these things exist. So if you are somebody who is able to get an internship in the industry during your master's degree or PhD degree, I would highly encourage you to do that, because I think that gives you a better idea of what things are the same, but also what things are different in the industry than in academia.
So as students, how should we prepare ourselves for these multinational companies like Microsoft or Google or Amazon, where you are currently working?
I mean, you said multinational, so maybe you're focusing on that particular aspect of it. I mean, certainly what I would say is try to surround yourself with a diverse set of people. When I say diverse, I mean diverse both in terms of knowledge, in terms of their backgrounds, in terms of, cultural things. Because when you come to these companies, which, as you said, indeed are multinational, you're gonna be working with people who come from, all walks of life. You'll be working with people who studied very different things than you did, but they have the same job description somehow. They have the same role. You'll also be talking to teams that are not even in the same location as you are, in different time zones. So there's a lot of interesting things that happen when you are working in a team in one country and you have to talk to another team in a different country. So that's not very easy to deal with, especially at the beginning. So I would say the more you can surround yourself with a diverse set of people, let's say during your master's program, the better off you will be and the better prepared you will be. There's something very appealing, of course, in only talking to people who are, let's say, from the same country that we are or who speak the same language. I understand that, of course, and that's important because you need that support kind of network, and right, and you need to have people around you that you can trust and who can understand that and have a similar context as you do. But don't overdo it, right? Don't let that prevent you from making connections with people who might be, who have studied something very different than you, for example, or have different interests or what have you. I think that's extremely important.
Yes, but when we talk about not just models, we also need to take into consideration different aspects of runtime, or whether running the model is expensive or not. How should a student who is currently studying, say, PhD or masters, like most of us here, prepare themselves, except for doing an internship, which you have already mentioned?
So you mean, how can somebody gain an appreciation of metrics besides quality if you're only doing a master's? I hope I'm getting the question right. And I hate to be repeating myself, but I think getting an internship is probably the best thing that you can do, because it also kind of already gives you that exposure as well that I was just talking about. Honestly, in a lot of ways, an internship is treated by companies really as if you're an actual employee, an actual member of that team. I'm talking specifically about full-time internships. So I wouldn't dismiss those experiences. Maybe the expectations might be a bit different. Maybe the scope will be a bit more limited. Surely the duration is also more limited, but otherwise, you're really treated as a member of the team. You're going to be attending the same kinds of meetings. You'll be talking about the same kind of problems. You obviously work on the same product. So I think it gives you a very, very good idea of what it's like to be in the industry, particularly on that team, but also in general at that company or in that industry.
Okay, let's take a step back and discuss something a little different. You did your PhD. That is a different world, to be very honest. And now you're working in the industry, which is very end customer centric.
Yeah.
How are these two worlds different? How do you fit in?
If I can talk about specifically getting a PhD, and I think a lot of people might agree with this, there's a lot of skills that you pick up upon being in a PhD program. I mean, particularly if you actually finish it, but even if you don't, right? But I think there's a lot of skills that you pick up beyond the technical aspect of things that become very important to you later on in the industry or otherwise. I mean, we were talking about communication a lot. As a PhD student and as somebody who's writing a PhD, you need to be very good at, let's say, evangelizing your work, right? Talking about what you're doing and kind of getting people excited about it. So that's very good. I think also getting a PhD teaches you a lot of patience, to be honest. And that is something you will need in the industry for sure, because a lot of things will be unexpected, and you need to be able to deal with kind of unexpected things and have enough flexibility to deal with them, and not kind of lose track of what's important. So I do think these are things that I picked up in my PhD program. No, I don't think everybody has to get a PhD. There's a lot of other ways to pick up these skills. For me personally, it worked out well. I wanted to get into a PhD program because I was passionate about specific topics. I wanted to be able to see that I can achieve that particular, achievement in our field. But by no means do I think it's super critical or kind of a hard requirement for any kind of role. I mean, probably if you're interested in a research career or in a academic career where you're like teaching, yeah, I can imagine a PhD would be something that's a requirement in a lot of places. But in the industry, I don't think it is. I've seen a lot of people succeed without a PhD, and that's there's a lot of other sources where you can learn things and have interesting experiences and be successful.
Well, we are towards the end of this conversation, and since we discussed mainly on recruitment, I want to ask you a few more questions on recruitment and not other topics that we had previously discussed, and then quickly go to the questions from the audience that we have got. Will that be okay with you?
Yeah.
Okay. So for young professionals or professionals in general who want to be in the NLP field, like most of us for that matter, which technologies or tools or knowledge would you recommend them to focus on?
Well, I think a lot of the tools we have in NLP are really interconnected with each other, right? So, somebody could come in here and say, I think you should be very good at, creating models in TensorFlow, let's say. So TensorFlow is indeed, let's say, the most popular library for training training models with deep learned architecture. But a lot of places don't even use TensorFlow. They might have their own libraries or a different one. So it's very hard to say this one tool is really what you should pick up, or this one particular model is what you should be familiar with. I mean, definitely try to be aware of the main problems, I would say. Maybe knowing the problems is a bit more useful than just knowing the tools, because the tools are always changing, right? And the state of the art is always advancing. And I think even somebody in the chat mentioned that. They have another question, but the problems, a lot of them are really quite constant, right? So we talk about language modeling as an example. Language modeling has been around for decades, right? As a problem definition, at least. So which, by the way, I do think is one of the most fundamental problems in NLP, right? So if you are trying to go into NLP, if you don't know much about language modeling or the background to how we got to where we are today, that's going to be challenging for you. So I would say understanding the problems is probably as critical, maybe more critical than understanding specific tools or specific models, because these things are always changing. And there's always something new coming out. So I hope that's not an unsatisfying answer, but I would say, language modeling for sure, sequence to sequence problems like, translation or summarization. These are things that we just come across a lot. Certainly, you still need to have the machine learning fundamentals down, particularly things like, classification, hypothesis testing, interpreting metrics. These sorts of things will always be relevant, and they will always be important, no matter what problem you're working on or no matter what year we happen to be in.
Okay. Would you like to add something to it?
To the answer that I just finished?
Okay, no, possibly. There are thousands of papers published per month in the field of NLP.
Yeah.
And there are other advancements made by other companies around the globe. How do you keep yourself updated?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not by trying to read thousands of papers a month or even a year. So I think the most important thing you can do here is to surround yourself with people who are in a similar field, or at least interested in knowing the advancements in these things, because each person is going to come across something new and they'll share it with everybody else, hopefully, if you have that kind of group. And so you're only one person, but if you're in a group of, let's say, 10 people that you communicate with regularly, then you're getting kind of these, let's call them, you're getting like a feed from 10 different people. Now, there are some things that I'm not mentioning because I think they're somewhat probably obvious and people already know these things. So you can, subscribe to specific blogs, or there's a lot of interesting things being advertised on professional networks and other places. So this, Y Combinator, there's a lot of sources that I assume a lot of people know already. These are very important things. But I would say the most important thing is to surround yourself with a group of people who are also interested in knowing what the state of the art is and what advancements are coming out. Now, in terms of papers and research and knowing what's happening, I mean, probably if you focus on the major conferences, so for NLP, there's ACL, which was actually happening this week. And what you'll have in ACL is not only research that is top quality, because that's the most well, it has a very rigorous reviewing process. So any paper that's published there, you know that there's something good in that. But also what you'll get to do is hear other people talk about their work and talk about the papers that are presented, and you'll get a good sense of what are the next important things that people are thinking of doing, right? So it's not only important to know already what's done now or what happened yesterday, but also what people are thinking about doing tomorrow. That's also important. So yeah, that's a variety of different little things, but also each person has their own way of learning about these things and picking them up. So the important thing is that you are learning all the time. It might be a different tool, it might be different ways of getting that knowledge, but as long as you're actually interested in learning new things and you're making an effort to identify sources of this new information, I think you'll be good and you're on the right track.
At this point, I think it's best we take a couple of questions from the audience. We have 4 questions filtered by the team. The first is by Shivalika, and I believe her question is already answered in this. And the question says, the research in AI is moving very fast. Do you have any suggestions to keep up with the pace of research? Because it is simply not possible to read all the research papers. I think we just answered that.
Yeah, I mean, I can say maybe one more thing here. I think we addressed that. I would just add, when you are reading a paper, don't necessarily try to understand all the ins and outs of that paper, right? I would say, try to understand what problem they're solving, try to get the main idea of their solution, but also, and then the metrics, I guess, the results. And then decide, do I really want to go deeper on this? And because going deep on a paper is actually not a trivial effort, right? So I would say be picky. Read a lot of papers, but be picky in which ones you go really deep on. And I think that you'll end up getting a lot of knowledge doing that without investing too much time.
It's like reading the abstract, the introduction, the conclusion, and a bit of the methods and maybe related.
Yeah. I mean, I think honestly, abstract is often not a great way, even though maybe it should be. But kind of as you said, right? I mean, understand at least what is the problem they're trying to solve. What is the one thing that they're actually contributing? If you just know what that is, that's enough. I don't think you need to really understand exactly how it's implemented or all the ins and outs of the metrics or the equations. Leave that until the end. If you really think you should go deep on this paper, by all means do it. But you get more from kind of reading the main parts of 10 papers and going deep on one, let's say, than you might on going deep on 2 or 3, because that's a lot of time. That can take a lot of effort.
Yeah, that's what we do in literature review for our projects and our master thesis, and definitely PhD.
Right, because you will be directly building on top of that, right? So then it is very important, right? But if you're reading it just because somebody said, "Hey, read this paper, it's interesting," you should go take a look at it. But doesn't mean you have to spend a couple hours on it or more. It adds up pretty quickly.
Apoorva has a question, and the question reads like this: some job descriptions mention PhD students are encouraged to apply, even though the students pursuing masters have the necessary skills mentioned. Basically, she came across situations where she qualifies for a job, but it mentioned PhD students encouraged to apply. Should she apply?
Yes, apply. Why not?
Okay. The next question is by Tarun, and the question reads, in data science related roles, how much in your experience do you think the skills related to data structures and algorithms matter?
I think they matter a lot. Well, so there are 2 ways to answer this question. Do you think it matters to pass the interview? And I think the answer there is definitely yes. I mean, I have never interviewed for a position around science or machine learning that didn't involve at least some coding portion, right? So just to even do well there, I think you definitely need to have a very good understanding of data structures, algorithms, etc. When it comes to doing the job itself, I can't speak on behalf of all companies, but in every role I've been in, that was also the case, right? Even when I was doing research in my PhD or after that, I've always done coding, and I think that's definitely critical. So I would not neglect that for sure.
Okay. There is one question from Harshit Juneja. Could you mention a recent development in your field of expertise that has caught your attention? Recent development.
I mean, I think, I don't know how, I mean, it's recent in the sense that it's still going on. It's not like something that happened last month. I think there's a recent trend, and maybe we're seeing some reversal of it, but there's a trend in just seeing these really, really large models, millions, billions of parameters. I mean, that's to me just incredible. And that was, not something I expected would happen. If you asked me 10 years ago, are we going to see models with, 1 billion, 2 billion parameters? I would say, why would you even want that? What kind of problem are you trying to solve? I'm not saying that's a bad thing, right? There are problems that need that. And what's interesting now is we're seeing a reversal of that trend, or at least a lot of people trying to say, you know what, maybe we don't need 1 billion parameters to do the same thing. So there's some efforts into, call it what you want. It's either model compression or model efficiency. There's a lot of different ways of looking at it. So that was also interesting, right? So the initial trend was interesting to me, caught me by surprise. But also this latest somewhat reversal, I suppose, was also interesting, because when you see everyone going in one direction, bigger, 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 but then some people say, well, wait a minute, that's not so great for people who don't have computational resources to train or run these models. So that was also interesting. And I think I'm happy to see those things, but it certainly was not something I expected.
Okay, we take 2 quick questions because we are really short of time now. One is by Disha Setlur. From an industrial point of view, do you recommend having a broad experience with various tools or specialize in one?
I definitely don't think you should specialize in one. And I want to be very careful when I say this, because at the same time, you should be able to make it very clear what your expertise is. And you should have an expertise, right? So there is also a risk in being a generalist, I guess, is one good way of saying it. But if you only have superficial knowledge about things, it doesn't matter if you know 10 things or 100 things. If it's superficial, it's superficial. So I don't want my answer to be misconstrued as saying you don't have to go deep on things. I would say, though, it's quite risky to say I'm gonna go super deep on, let's say, Python, because 10 years from now, maybe we won't be using Python. Maybe it will go the way of other languages. Now, unless you want to be part of a team that's developing Python, that's something else, of course, right? So to some extent, I guess it does depend on the job you're applying to. But in general, I would say be very careful when you identify one thing and you say, this is the one thing I'll go super deep on. Things change all the time, first of all, in how to solve a problem, but also the requirements of a job change all the time. The requirements that a company has changes. So if you're not already somebody who has knowledge in a lot of different things, at least you should gain the ability, and I don't know how to do that. It's easier said than done, but you should be somebody who is able to pick up new skills and able to pick up new technologies. That's always going to be important, no matter what you're doing, I feel.
We have a question from Muhammad Jonibul Islam. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. And the question reads, how hard was it for you to decide to go to industry and not continue your research work after PhD? What was your thinking process or metric to decide between research and industry?
For me personally, the decision was very easy.
Okay.
Because that was just my preference, and that's the way I wanted to contribute to the world. But this definitely varies from person to person. So there's a lot of things to take into account. And
I'll ask a follow-up question.
Yeah, okay.
Why do you think continuing after PhD as a postdoctoral researcher not contributing? Or is less contributing?
No, I didn't say they don't contribute. I said that's not the way I wanted to contribute.
Okay.
Right? I thought I can contribute in a better way, and I could be happier doing something different. And there's a lot of people where the opposite is true, and I would not encourage them to go to the industry, right? If you're somebody who is very passionate about specific kinds of research and being in a specific kind of setup where you conduct research, I think you'll be very frustrated in the industry, and you'll feel that you're missing out. So I think it's more a matter of personal preference than anything else. For me, it was a personal preference.
Okay, we take one more question. This is by Shubham, who is a team member. And the question reads, in general, young professionals have apprehensions about applying for big companies. Regarding their skills won't be sufficient. These companies have tough criteria to filter. Since you have worked at Microsoft and now at Amazon, how did you apply for them? anything specific that helped you during your application phase?
Mhm. Yeah, I think maybe the question is about kind of concerns, or you feel you're not good enough, so you don't apply because, none of us likes rejection. I mean, I can also understand that part of it. So before answering the question, I'll kind of repeat something I said earlier, and I would say go ahead and apply. Even if you feel not super confident, you'll never know unless you apply. There's a lot of people who are in these companies, and again, they have very different backgrounds. So it's not like these companies are only looking for a very specific profile. That's not true. So I would say go ahead and apply, and let's see what happens. Now, my own personal experience, there's nothing special that I did, right? In one of these positions that I applied, I happened to know, not to know the team, but they happened to be a team that I talked to before and I presented something to, so they kind of knew who I am. But the other two positions that I applied to and got in, I didn't know anyone on that team, right? And I applied in the normal channels, and it worked out. I do think it helps if you, let's say, know somebody at the company who can recommend you to that team, as long as they know you quite well, because then their input or their, let's say, what do you call it? Like their recommendation of you actually is meaningful because they know you quite well. So that might help. I think the most important thing is to have a resume that makes it very clear what you can bring to the team and why you would be a good fit for that role. And beyond that, I mean, it does vary a bit from company to company, how the recruiting happens and what kind of channels or things that you can use to increase your chance of getting an interview. That really varies from company to company. But I think for the most part, if you have the right qualifications, you have a really good chance of progressing.
Would you have 2 more minutes to answer the
Yes.
last question? Okay. So
Yeah,
Disha
sure.
asks, what other technical responsibilities are entailed from a corporate point of view for a machine learning engineer other than training models and presenting the results? I think this question was partly answered before during the conversation. Would you like to add something on it?
Yeah, I mean, by the way, machine learning engineer is another one of those titles that means different things at different companies. I mean, let's see if I can understand the question properly. There is a lot that goes into our work that also is really just about formulating the problem, right? Understanding if the problem is real and understanding how to quantify it, and kind of convincing others that this is a real problem. So you need to have the right metrics and you need to have done the right analysis. So there's some opportunity analysis that you can do, or there's, I don't know how you want to do it. Talk to actual customers and see what they're struggling with. So a lot of these things come in even before you build your very first model. So kind of the short way to answer the question is, yes, there are other things you do. And what these other things are depends on the specific team, the specific company. But the one thing that's definitely true for all of these roles is that you can't ahead of time define exactly, here are the 3 things you will do and that's it. Frankly, if that's the case, maybe I would say maybe that's a bit boring, to me at least. I like it when there are always new challenges and there are new even responsibilities to some extent. As long as it's something where I can feel I can make impact and my skill set is relevant, I welcome it.
For a young professional, yes, most students, at least in this university, not most, but a lot of them go for internships. And majority, at least, they do a work student role in some company. Keeping that in mind, how important is your master thesis when you apply for a permanent role after you graduate?
So if you're asking how important is the topic itself,
the topic, the procedure, the way you have worked, and finally the grade.
Yeah, I mean, it is important. So to be clear, nobody's going to read your master's thesis. So that's not why it's important. It's not like something you need to have there so that people can review it. I think there was, some people also ask something like, is my GPA important? And, that varies from company to company, I suppose. But at least the GPA is just something you can show on your resume, right? So whoever is interviewing you, they just know it. The master's thesis, nobody's going to go and read it before they interview you, right? So maybe it sounds like, well, so it's not so important. Now here, I think it is important actually, because it just helps you, again, it helps you be better at identifying problems and identifying solutions to them. So it's going to help you in the long run. It's going to help you even in the interview process itself. Now, if the topic of your thesis happens to be relevant to that team, it's clearly something that's very helpful, because then you can actually say, hey, actually, I worked on a problem that's similar to what you're working on. And like, no good team's going to miss that. They're going to recognize that and recognize it as being something that's helpful. The other thing is that a lot of the interviews actually open up with, tell me about your work, tell me about your thesis. So you will get a chance to talk about it, and that's always interesting. So I would say it's definitely important, not in the sense that people go look it up and try to read it. Maybe some interviews would do that, I guess. They might read the abstract, but generally, we don't have too much time to learn about the candidate before we actually interview them. So
Okay,
you'll deliver the most information in the interview itself. So yes, the master thesis is very important, but it's not because somebody's going to read it beforehand.
So when you say you do not have too much information about the candidate, would you at least go through their LinkedIn profile maybe, or a cover letter?
Yeah. I personally try to look someone up on LinkedIn. It's a bit tricky because not everybody on LinkedIn is in LinkedIn, but also some names are very common, right? So you can't always tell who's who. But certainly if they put the LinkedIn
that small.
Yes. But if they actually put a link on the resume to the LinkedIn profile, I will visit it, right? Because this is something they're saying, hey, this is interesting, go look at it, and I'll just do that. But a lot of people don't, right? For a variety of reasons, lack of time, or they don't want to be biased in some way. That I can also understand that. I personally like to look at people's LinkedIn profile because it's actually more standardized in its presentation. So it gives me a better way of knowing what somebody did. Whereas resumes have very different styles, and that's not a bad thing, but it's just, for me personally, I find it more efficient sometimes. You asked about cover letters. I mean, I have a personal opinion about cover letters. I don't think they matter, but
Okay.
I've never written a cover letter. I think at least not since, I can't even remember the last time I wrote a cover letter. I think there are some companies that require it. I don't know what they do with it. Presumably they do something. I honestly don't know. I have never looked at a cover letter before interviewing someone. So take that for what it's worth.
Last follow-up question. Since I know that a person who asked questions, Zishan Sheikh, has a tech blog and I have a personal blog, in case we mention this blog, the link to the blog on the resume, would you or any other recruiter go there as well?
Yeah, they might, for sure. I think anything you put on the resume, keep in mind somebody might look at it. I mean, even the cover letter, I kind of was very dismissive of it. If somebody submits a cover letter with their application, yeah, it's likely that somebody will look at it and read it. So for sure, don't put links to things that, I don't know, don't put a website that's down, for example, or that doesn't work. Or if you say, here's a demo that I did, make sure it actually works, right? I mean, it's not so great if it doesn't. So it varies from person to person, but go for it. If you think there's some interesting information there, include it.
Omar, it's incredible having this conversation with you, and I wish I could ask you more questions and on a variety of topics. Maybe if you come up with other mini series of this podcast, could we expect you to be there again as a guest?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to see these kinds of initiatives. And I mean, when you reached out, when you and Shubham reached out, I was flattered, but I was also happy to see people taking that initiative. That's, I guess, if I can say one last piece of advice to people, is do reach out to people, let's say on LinkedIn or wherever, that you feel are relevant to you. Again, I'm not saying you should spam people, but don't prevent yourself from reaching out to someone. Like, don't say, oh, they must be too busy, they're not going to read my message. Well, you know what? If they're too busy, they're too busy. They won't read your message, but let them decide that, right? Don't decide on their behalf. You'll never know. If you don't reach out to them, you'll never know if they're too busy to read it. So always take the initiative, whether that's reaching out to people or applying to positions or learning more things. You have to you have to take an initiative to do interesting things and change whatever it is that you want to change. I hope that made sense.
We thank you so much for having found time and conversing like this. We have overshot by 10 minutes already. Thank you so much.
Sure, you're welcome. No worries. And good luck to everyone. I hope there were a couple of things that we said here that are useful to you. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have a follow-up question or something that you feel I might be able to address. I'm always happy to help people.
Hi again. You have made it till the end of this amazing conversation. Please check this space out next week, Wednesday as well. Next week, we publish the episode where we interview Mr. Asid Datta, who is the head of recruitment at Fluent GmbH. You may find that useful as well. We aim to release one new episode every Wednesday for the next 8 weeks on LinkedIn, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, at least. There are other platforms, but these are the main ones. If you find this conversation useful, please share this with your friends and stay connected with us. Thank you for listening.